Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Developing Central Defenders of the Future session with myself, JB Robinson. I'm head of the FA's professional game team, coach development setup. And we're going to spend the next 75 to 90 minutes chatting with some esteemed colleagues who've got great experience in playing and coach development and coaching, talking about central defenders. You should have seen the video around the principles of play. Some interesting elements there about the defending side. You know, on the screen you can see the elements of in possession and out of possession. Obviously, these are some of the principles that sit behind football, sit behind your sessions, sit behind the players' kind of understanding of how the game's played. There's a few things I'd just like to talk about before we get going. Obviously, we understand we're here to talk about developing central defenders. But obviously, I think this period of COVID has really highlighted how crucial football is to all of us, you know, how central it is to our lives. Obviously, we've got a range of people that have tuned into this and listening to this and listening to the discussion, who work in, you know, grassroots with people and players' first contact with football and footballers, and trying to, you know, instill a love of the game from the first moment they kick a ball, you know, through to more experienced coaches that will have been involved with football for many, many years. You know, I don't want to embarrass the panel, but I probably will, is that, you know, between the experience of the six of us on this call, and I'll go through their backgrounds in a minute, there's over 1,500 games in the professional world in the male and female game. and over 150 years experience. So we're going to tap into that over the course of the afternoon. And it's great to be joined by Emma Coates, who's a national coach in the female side of the England setup. Three coaches for the men's side: Keith Downing, Richie Kyle, and Andrew Edwards, both vastly experienced in the professional game from a range of different backgrounds. And we've also got Chris Sulley, who works in the team that I'm privileged enough to look after. We're focusing on coach development. So Chris Sulley is one of our coach developers, and obviously Matt Ramsbottom is working alongside us, who's our performance analysis. So Richie's gonna start us off by tapping into the next slide is about some of the England out of possession principles that we base some of the work on with the national teams. And Rich is just going to talk us through those three concepts. He did a previous webinar on this that'll be on the FA YouTube site if you want to tap into some more in-depth sort of detail on the out of possession principles. But Rich is going to just talk us through these sort of principles as the backdrop to the discussion today, which is going to be about centre backs. Rich.
Yeah, I think I just wanted to highlight really the key headlines of the out of possession principles that we use with the England teams, and then I think throughout the presentation we're going to try and relate that to how that looks for the centre halves and the defenders in the game. So we wanted to start with the pressing really, and when we did this, we streamlined it, we stripped it down into 3 principles, and I think we had like 6 or 7. So we wanted it to be sort of memorable, punchy, but at the same time still having the detail and the relevance for all the England teams. And obviously the first one we wanted to come to was the pressing side of the game. And we always want our England team to win the ball back as quick as we possibly can. And it's a big aspect of the modern day game. But I think due to the athletic nature of our players and the mentality that we want the players to have, it was a big part, and the focus was around when we lose the ball, we get the ball back as quick as we possibly can with the nearest man pressing the ball, nearest player press the ball immediately if you possibly can. And I think that was the sort of mantra really for our first sort of England player coming into the building, was that this is what we're about and this is what we intend to live throughout the pathway. And then obviously being at the international level, it was about, well, if we can't always press the ball and win it back, we've got to press with some intelligence and react to pressing triggers. So whether that's a structured start, whether that's open play, whether that's a type of pass, if it's a slow pass or a bad touch that we can jump on, it was getting the intelligence of the players to recognise when them triggers were. So as I say, it can range from a goal kick, it can range from when the team are building up play, it can range when they're in the middle of the pitch. But I think the key point that I want to try and get across here, it was all over the pitch was the pressing aspect. It wasn't necessarily you're just going to press high up the pitch. It could be losing the ball in the middle part of the pitch. It could be a pressing trigger on the side if it's gone to a fullback. So it was that nature of pressing all over the pitch. And I think once we talk about the pressing, it was around the individuals, but what is actually looking like behind the press. So what's the support like from behind? So are we denying passes? Are we restricting space? Are we recognising that when one player, the next player goes and then the unit goes? So again, it was that intelligent pressing strategies when we do go and press. And then I suppose the last part of the pressing sort of aspect was the regains. So regaining it with intelligence, the decision making, when to press, the positioning, all that kind of detail about, well, when we do go and press, we've actually got to go and win the ball back. So I think the detail in there and the summary of it will be the counter pressure to win it back as early as we possibly can, the pressing triggers, what does the support look like, and then how do we regain the ball. And I say we try and implement that throughout the pathway and to all the players. In relation to the compact shape, again, it's a big aspect of the game. We can't always press the ball. There's moments in the game when either we're in a mid block or we're in a compact shape high up the pitch. But again, it was we can do this all over the pitch. It's not just the middle part of the pitch. You might be in a compact shape low, as I say. You might be in a compact shape high, and you might just be waiting for that pressing trigger. So it was all about well, if we can't press the ball, what do we want it to look like? We want it to go around, not through. We don't want to be open. We want to be narrow and compact. We want the delay and deny forward passes coming through us, force them to the outside, in relation to into your game plan. But that was the key sort of fundamentals of when we are in a compact shape. And then once you're in that compact shape, we're obviously looking to try and win the ball back again so we can get into a pressing state. So the real key details around when the ball goes back, we move up the pitch. We don't want to sit in a mid-block. We want to wait for opportunities to go and press and win that ball back. So move in relation to the ball. We want to recognise when we can make that press. So it's a strategy that we've got, and it'll differ in different teams, and it'll differ in different situations. It might be in a tournament football where we've had 5 games in the space of a week. It might be a really hot situation, but there's times when we've got to utilise these fundamentals of a compact shape. So, as I say, for us, it was around, not through, move in relation to the ball, and recognise when to get back into a pressing state. They were the 3 key fundamentals, really, of the compact shape. And then the last sort of principle that we wanted to speak about was the 1v1 defending, which I'm sure will come up a lot in today's webinar, around defending all over the pitch. Again, just not in one aspect of the game. It can be when a winger is going to go and press the centre back. What does his defending look like? It can be a winger running at your full back. How does he defend that? So all the basic fundamentals of 1v1 defending, that I think is vital for modern day players, but players in general in the game. And I think the three key points we had on 1v1 defending was the position and awareness. Does the player know positionally where he needs to be? Has he got an awareness? Does he know what his main information is when he's going to press the ball, or he's defending a winger that's dribbling at him? Is he forcing him to the outside? Is he forcing him inside? And then one of the biggest things for me was the mentality of the defending. So have they got the mentality to block it? They've got the bravery, the courage. They've got the anticipation to nick the ball. It's all them little finer details in your 1v1 defending that you're hoping you can get out in the mentality and wanting to do the defending, and not just being a sort of token gesture. And then again, the last bit, and it's coming more and more to what the modern game about winning the ball cleanly. The game's changing. You can't go to ground as much. You're getting pulled up on the slightest bit of contact. So again, it's having that intelligence to win the ball cleanly, having good footwork, having composure, don't diving in, having good technique on when to win the ball. So it's all fundamentals in your 1v1 defending, which I'm sure will come out with around the centre half. So a sort of summary really of the 1v1 defending would be your positioning awareness, your mentality, and then winning the ball cleanly would be the key areas we look at through the pathway.
Sounds good, Rich. Good, excellent overview, I think, of the principles. And we're just going to come to you in a second to just build on that on the female side of the FA's setup with our national teams. Just see people starting to put questions into the chat. If you've got any questions, then please stick them in there. Again, we're trying to cater for a range of backgrounds. I've just had a text from Ashley Westwood, who works overseas, so it's good to hear from Ash. Hope you are well, Ash. So please drop your comments, drop your questions in there, and we'll try to pick them up over the next sort of hour or so. Emma, have you got things to add? I see Steph's in that photo there, 1v1 defending. Obviously, Steph Horton has had a fantastic career and being a real role model as a centre back. Is there anything you want to add from your perspective?
I think it's important to know that obviously, we work under basically the same principles. We're just developing a process at the minute in the women's game, actually what makes them subtle and unique to the women's game. So while the underlying principles are similar, what it takes to win and some of the tactical trends are slightly different. So where in the past we've potentially picked up the same principles applied in the men's game, we're now in a position, if you like, with where the women's game's gone and the member of staff that we've got in place, that we're actually looking to tailor that. And that's something that is very much a work in progress at the minute, but really similar in the sense of, we want to press and go and get the ball back as quickly as we can. And that's going to impact every unit. So when we start looking at centre halves in particular, is what's the impact on them and how do we then start to profile our players around that? Likewise, in the same, when we start thinking about the differences and the subtleties of international demands, is how do we sustain that over a tournament? That's where the compact team shape and some of the mid-block work that we're looking into becomes super important. You know, and the 1v1 defending stuff, I think that for me is a real game changer in the sense of if we have every player able to, you know, be excellent in 1v1 defending, body combat, body and limbs, derailing players, then, you know, hopefully we can actually press the ball high and sustain that over a long period of times, and looking at some of the physical demands of that as well. So it's very similar. We're in a slightly different position of the men's team that we're still sort of developing what our actual principles are.
Okay, thanks, Emma. Good. Yeah. Again, I'm sure we'll unpick that more as we work through the presentation and the conversation. We're just going to show you just a little still at this moment in time, and I'm going to come to Keith Downing and Andy Edwards just to think about the kind of centre back role and some of the detail that we might get into. So, you know, in terms of the ball being there in the final third, and obviously we've chatted about this as a team kind of in preparation for this session, and you know, it is one of our focuses about thinking around this position specific elements and some of the key things we want to try and reinforce in the game. And obviously, we've chatted, you know, in real detail, you know, about, you know, great teams can win games, you know, great attacking teams can win games, but great defending teams, you know, win tournaments and win leagues. Keith, what jumps out from your experience just about generally in sort of developing central defenders and around compactness?
Well, they can control the team from that position, wherever you are on the pitch. So we've got a slide there just in terms of a low block, and obviously the importance of keeping the opposition away from the goal as much as possible. And that works through the thirds really into mid block and also into a high press. They can see the whole pitch. They control the people in front of them, and they can also control their strikers and their forwards. I think the importance in terms of compact shape is actually, and I've wrote this down, is to control the opposition without the ball. So not as an element of panic, but a composure and to actually stay calm, work out your positions. And also good centre-backs need to be good decision makers, when to engage, when to drop off. Like anything, the ball is at its worst is when it's behind you. So not to allow the ball in behind you, not allowed to be strikers to be allowed to get in behind you. So the decision making is constant all the time, when to squeeze, when to engage, when to delay. And like the panel has said, it's now about 1v1 defending. So it's about interceptions. Is it about delaying? Is it about spoiling? All those things that come into decision making. So for me, it is a really important position because it's right in front of the goal. It's next to the goalkeeper. You can't make mistakes. You have to be clear and composed in that area.
Great. Thanks, Keith. Ed, do you just want to pick up? You're obviously a vastly experienced centre-back. You know, there's a question that's come through around playing in a back three and a back four. I know this graphic here shows a right full back, maybe three centre-halves and a left back and maybe a wide left pressing. What do you think some of the differences have been in your experience between playing as a centre-back in a back three or a back four, or the principles exactly the same?
Well, I think the principles are the same, Jamie. You know, whatever your principles as a team, as a club, us as an FA, I think the principles remain the same in terms of getting pressure on the ball. We look to force them on the outside as much as possible. Game plans can dictate that changes. But it is about keeping that compact shape. It is about covering the goal in this situation here. And for me, that psychological side of it is so important as a defender. That concentration, the focus, which links into the decision making. I think the biggest threat to any centre half is the space behind. But at the same time, you've got to make sure you keep connected to the rest of your players. So you keep looking to work that line, but you're aware of the danger behind at any given time. So that psychological side of it, I think, is a massive part, whether it's in a back four or a back five.
Yeah, good. And I suppose over to you, Chris, next. A question's come in, which I think links to this picture about like the kind of like this. The 10 outfield players are in that shot at the minute. You know, so they have an in and out of possession strategy. You know, that obviously England is trying to break them down. You know, and What some of the factors you think that teams either decide to press? Why some teams decide not to press high up the pitch and drop off and implement more of a low block sort of setup? What are you seeing in your experience when you go around helping other coaches?
I think it obviously depends on the personnel, the attributes of your centre backs. If there's an issue around pace being turned, they might want to defend deeper. If they've got quick strikers, they might want to leave a Vardy type striker up front. In this instance, obviously they're all back, which makes you wonder how they're going to get out. But they do break quickly, and have done. I think this is Wolves, and I think they do it. Have done it really well. But yeah, I think obviously it depends on your personnel, and it depends on your team strategy. And as we've seen, you can not have a lot of possession and win games. So having possession isn't the be all and end all.
Yeah. Apologies. It must be these new glasses I've got. Can't see the screen very well. If we just flick forward onto the next slide, we're just going to talk about, to build on the graphic you've just seen, about some of the elements that you might think about when you're helping your centre backs, in terms of their individual role as you work through the thirds. I think we've seen some major developments, certainly over the last 5 or 6 years, when, if you think of Real Madrid and the way they would defend when the ball's really high up the pitch, where the centre backs end up being at sort of at the top of the attacking third, if you can picture that. So they're right in the opposition's half. They're trying to press the opposition right in, and they're trying to pin the opposition right in their final third. Again, I'll start with you, Chris. What have you seen in terms of centre backs' role in each of the thirds? So do you want to just expand a little bit from a centre?
Yeah, I think when you're pressing high, I think we're seeing a much more pressing from the centre backs, going right the way in to actually stop the counter-attack, and looking for that kind of Gegen pressing to try and get the ball back early, and that sort of helps the whole team to get the second and third wave attacks, and but it also means that they've got to be quite athletic, because if the ball goes in behind them, then they've got to be able to cover the space behind them, as Andy alluded to. That's obviously the worst thing that can happen to you. You get caught in behind.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the question just coming, it's probably links to your point there you made. Also, as a centre back, I know from first-hand experience, the relationship I've got with a keeper who's behind me, thinking about where his or her starting position needs to be, is absolutely crucial. Depends
absolutely. I think we often forget about them, don't we? Bless them. So it's that space in behind the defenders and the goalkeepers. We get them on that higher start positions, and obviously move in relation to the ball, but being on their toes ready. And you see that with the modern goalkeepers now, the teams that are pressing high, the goalkeepers are out sweeper keeping, and it's another crucial sort of advancement of the game. Yeah. From those midfield areas, if you're putting on some kind of a recovery into team shape, so you're putting on a mid block, you're being aware as a centre back that the opposition might get forced into playing longer passes. So again, that reading of the body language of the man on the ball and being able to know when to drop, when to go short with your man is crucial. And again, the goalkeeper sweeping behind you, knowing you can cover that space. So some real lots and lots of decisions going on in nanoseconds as the ball shifts, and if you read the body language of the man on the ball, is there pressure on it? Is there not?
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
Good, Chris. Ed, do you want to just expand on that and talk us about the sort of mid-block sort of considerations when you're playing at centre back, and what are some of the things you might be thinking as a centre half, and therefore as a coach looking at the centre halves? What are some of the things you'd be observing and trying to work on with the players?
Well, I think we probably mentioned it already. I've touched upon it, and Chris has touched upon it as well. He's always thinking, like I say, the biggest threat as a centre half is that space in behind, making sure you're staying connected to the rest of your team. So it is about reading the play. It is about reading the player in possession. The challenge you've got about, in regards to your individual centre forward, whether they're playing 1 up or 2 up, is knowing your opponent. I think that's key to it as well. So that can dictate your start position or how far you might squeeze or when you might have to drop. So I think there'll be a lot of your considerations. And also we're seeing, centre backs maybe getting drawn into, centre forward go short of that locking on, and then when you're in that mid block, and that maybe isolates your partner, if you like. So the key thing there is your fullbacks, so making sure that they're narrow and you're protecting that space. So I think they're maybe the key points is when to go and press, when to go into that midfield area. What does your cover look like in your protection? But also recognising that there's always that threat behind.
Thanks, Ed. Emma, if I could just come to you now. And obviously you made the important point, I think, on the previous slide about the subtle differences between the male and female game. Is there anything that jumps out of you that you see from a centre-back's point of view that's very different between the male and female game in each of the thirds, and anything you'd want to sort of highlight?
I think ultimately it's very similar regarding the principles. I think the women's games, I think it's a smaller game, it's a tighter game due to some of the physical demands. And I think, one of the big differences and something that we feel makes centre-halves better is that ability to defend in big spaces. It's something I feel really strongly about. And I think a lot of centre-halves have a habit, particularly in that mid-block shape. Andy just spoke around that decision. Do I go and step in with the player or do I go and drop? Is actually they start pulling midfield players back, and then obviously the gaps between the units start getting bigger, which then means we then can't step out and press. I think a big thing we're trying to look at now is how does centre back have that confidence to protect that zone and go and step in, defend the space behind, regarding obviously pressure on and pressure off and all the decisions around that, but actually be confident doing that 1v1 as well. There's a huge trend in the women's game that everyone plays with a front 4-3-3 or a front three, so centre-halves are rarely exposed to playing against a front two or that player that's between the lines, and having centre-halves that can deal with that, I think makes a real difference, particularly in that mid-block shape.
I think, Jamie, Emma's right.
Yeah,
and seeing more and more. Sorry, Jamie, I just want to highlight that as well. You're seeing more and more sort of modern day centre backs that are able to deal in those exposed areas by stepping in. You're talking about the role of a centre back when your team's high up the field. It's about anticipation. It's about organising people in front of you for the transition, and it's about positionally where you're marking people. Are you on the correct side of the ball? So any ball that comes and clears out, you're able to engage and make the correct decision. But as you go further back, it is having that ability there to deal not just in front of you, but laterally as well. So compact shape doesn't mean just, vertical. It's lateral as well. If the ball is on one side of the field, getting that centre-back, that one of the first centre-backs across into the spaces laterally and being able to deal in channel areas if the ball goes out there. And you're seeing more and more likes of Van Dijk and De Ligt and in the Netherlands able to deal with those positions where sometimes probably years gone by, centre-backs would be pretty much looking after themselves in terms of centre of the pitch and in front of the goal. So I think the modern day centre-back has now become a little bit more suitable to sort of going into those difficult areas, those decision-making areas, and then being able to deal with that 1v1 confrontation.
Yeah, you've highlighted that point, I think, quite well over the last few months, haven't you? About that's been one of the biggest differences in the modern game, about the centre backs being taken into areas they don't particularly wanted to go in the past, but able to deal with that and go 1v1 into an area where they might not want to in the past. I.e., going into a midfield sort of centre midfield sort of area. Do you want to just expand on that a bit more? And then, Rich, do you want to build on that in a minute, just about the 1v1 stuff? So, Keith, go on. Do you want to just give us a bit more on that? How you think they've been dragged into areas they might not have been in the past?
Well, there's very much sort of 1v1 mentality, really. Emma's touched on it. Sometimes now formations are just one player up front, so it's 4-3-3 and two centre-backs having to deal with just the one player. So they can afford, obviously, one to go and engage and one to cover. I'm not saying it's gung-ho, Jamie. I'm not talking about, kamikaze defending, but they are comfortable in whatever position of the pitch the ball has gone to. They are able to work their feet. They'll be able to delay. They'll be able to spoil. They're able to slow the game down make it predictable. I think if I can cast my mind back, I think, we're talking about probably Ramos in Spain. We're talking about Luis, who's Brazilian. They sort of go in there quite aggressively. It's kind of an all or nothing, but it's very much putting pressure on the receiver, making it very difficult for them to get the ball comfortably under control. And obviously then it's down to then people around them, fullbacks tucking around and giving them that insurance and that cover that's just in case they do get it wrong. But I do think over the last few years there has become more and more, there is more agility, more mobile centre-backs, defenders that are comfortable in different areas.
And just to build on that point, Jamie, as well, I think Keith makes a good point about when you do get taken into those areas. I think the first protocol for me is sort of anticipating it and smelling it. So if it's in behind, are you reading the play? Is it looking like they're going to put it in behind? And on the other side of the coin, it's sensing the pass going into the feet. Are you giving yourself enough distance to really impact that play and put pressure on the ball? And then I think, when you strip it back down to the basic of actually coming up in a 1v1 in a wide area, so to speak, which is what Keith alluded to in terms of centre-back getting dragged out. It's about then having that composure, making sure you're not diving in, making sure that you're not fouling, staying on your feet, especially in the dangerous areas when it comes into the box, because that's the sort of the art of the 1v1 defending is winning that ball cleanly, but making sure that you're using the right techniques to make sure you win that ball and not give fouls away.
Yeah. I mean, go on. Sorry.
Yeah, I was going to say, and it's nice to hear that language. It is an art. I think people often forget that it's an art and it's a craft, and perhaps we've lost our focus a little bit on that.
Yeah. I think the artistic elements, and someone's mentioned asked a question in the chat box about kind of bravery, courage, anticipation, as well as like some of the physical attributes. But I suppose the artistry of being a centre half is combining all those elements, isn't it? To be technically proficient, to be able to really be astute tactically about what's expected. When I sometimes look at the pitch laid out like that, you have pictures in your mind of certain players who've done certain things in each of the thirds. It strikes me when Man United were at their very, very best, when they used to pin the opposition, deep in their half. Then Vidic and Ferdinand would deal with counter-attacking, 2v2, artistically, beautifully, whatever you want to call it, because they were, experts at what they did, Again, I suppose that's the development for us, isn't it? About the centre backs that we've had over the last X number of years. That's the continuation of that development of artistry. Before we jump on to the next one, does anyone want to mention any centre halves that jump out that have really shaped their understanding of the position over the last 30 years? I've obviously talked about Vidic and Ferdinand that has shaped some of my thoughts. Emma, do you want to highlight some of the female centre backs that you think are on top of their games, as it were, over the last X number of years?
Yeah, definitely. I know there's, you look back in terms of the history of the game is probably relatively short, but you look back to sort of the last wave of centre halves. You've got, likes of Faye White, Casey Stoney, Laura Bassett, who, in terms of the role that we talk about in terms of that 1v1 defending and that ability to physically cope with the demands, but also be sort of all-rounded in a sense of how do they connect with the goalkeeper, with the unit in front, keep those distances vertically and laterally. I think, they've sort of paved the way for the likes of your Steph Altons to come in and your Millie Brights. And, the role is changing in the women's game. There's definitely more demands being placed on centre halves due to, how rapidly the game is growing. So, I'd say there's definitely those three jump out for me.
Keith, do you want to delve back into your encyclopedic memory of footballers and give us your best centre backs over the last few decades? Who jumps out?
I don't want to embarrass myself in terms of my age, Jamie, but I'd like to touch on maybe, when you're talking about, 1v1s, we haven't mentioned anything in the box at the moment. So, we talked about mid and high. and having that agility to deal with those 1v1 situations. But also that obviously is very important in the defending in the area. And again, Emma's mentioned about relationships with goalkeepers. It's interesting. We had a webinar with Rio Ferdinand, and he was talking about relationships with Schmeichel or with Van der Sar, in terms of he'll cover the far post. So it's 1v1 in the box, he would cover the far post for him. So Schmeichel only had to consider or Van der Sar had to consider the 4 yards of goal. So, you know, those relationships with the goalkeepers, that 1v1 composure, working your feet, not diving in, not panicking, not giving penalties away. You know, they are really fundamental in terms of defending last ditch. If you talk about emergency defending, making play predictable, making them go wide, making them forcing the angle of the goal down, without sort of committing any fouls or penalties, or diving in and getting beaten by going to ground and then obviously having a free shot. So I just wanted to sort of we've emphasised a little bit further down the pitch, but the fundamentals of a top centre-back is obviously in front of the goal, prepared to block, prepared to stay on his feet, prepared to be composed in a real difficult, tight situation.
Yeah, and I think building on that, I mean, I was very fortunate to play with Colin Hendry for a couple of seasons, and he seemed to be a magnet. The ball seemed to always go towards him, or he seemed to anticipate where it was going in those emergency defending situations. And he was excellent at getting out and blocking shots and doing all those things that perhaps we would used to call ugly, but I think are very essential and very needy for a central defender. So, yeah, he jumps out when we start talking about that type of defender.
Yeah, and I think the discussion from here on in will be focused a little bit more around the defending third. You know, will be less around I suppose some of the other thirds, just because we want to. Maybe in the discussion we've had, we want to highlight this a little bit more, because I think as a group we were thinking that the centre back's profile has been about getting on the ball and trying to play out, you know, and has it, in terms of like a graphic equaliser, has it dialed down the defending attributes that we really, you know, we savour and we really sort of celebrate, you know. So that's the next part of the discussion. As we're going to come to you next, and Richie, just around going back through some of the technical attributes that you see on the sort of work we've done with the England teams. Do you want to expand on those points there that you see on the screen that jump out to you about some of the key elements for defending, particularly in the defending third?
Yeah, I'm just going to jump back to your last point, Jamie, actually, when you said about, you know, types of maybe defenders that have influenced you. I think there's a key point that so many of them are different, you know, but what they have all got in common is the ability to read the game, which is on the tactical side that you're positioning, and almost as a defender being that pessimist. So you look from Bobby Moore to Rio Ferdinand, Jamie Carragher, John Terry, Ledley King. I think they're all different. They've got different elements to their game, different strengths, and the different types of centre half. But the one thing they've all got in common is that ability to read the game and their positioning. You know, so sensing the danger, being a pessimist, expecting the worst, and being in the position to be. So that for me is the biggest thing. Just thinking back to your last point, and with that, I think one of the lads out of that group, where was fortunate enough to have a chat with them, and speaking of self-preservation, you know, making sure they've got that protection, which Keith mentioned earlier on. I think in turn that gives them that leadership side of the game, which is a big part of it. Your centre halves being good organised. Talking on the technical side with that defending 1v1, your footwork, you know, in that low block area, I think you said. Again, it is that ability to deal with 1v1 situations. It's the ability to anticipate and then to intercept. So can you work your feet to get in front without overcommitting yourself? I think that's key when you're faced up defending 1v1. That ability to stand balanced, to win the ball if you can, but to unsettle that attacker as well. You know, so I think that footwork is a big part of it now in those 1v1 situations where defenders are drawn out into maybe the space that's been left by fullbacks at times. So that's part of it.
I think to build on that, and when we did this work around the centre back, looking at the technical aspects and the tactical aspects, we had all the national coaches in the room, and it was it was sort of reams and reams of information and detail, and we sort of narrowed it down into key points that we think are relevant. But obviously the detail in it is immense, and just listening to Eagle then around even the heading bit, but there's more to it than the technical. So we're studying lots at the minute and doing lots of different projects, and we're looking a lot around. I know we're going to come onto it around defending crosses and people heading it out the box, but it's that coaching and the detail around the clearances. So heading it, you're getting your height and distance, and I know it's not necessarily old school information, but it's that clean contact on the head, and it's that clean contact, the clearances off your left foot, your right foot when the ball's coming into the box. Them sort of technical aspects that important on that side. And then I suppose the tactical side was, we were always speaking about the sensing the danger, the smelling it. So the best centre halves in our modern day, in terms of John Terry, Jamie Carragher, around getting in the right position early and smelling it where it might go, where the ball might go. How do you develop that would be a question for coaches on the grass, and how can you get your defenders to have that instinct to defend, that feel, that smell, and then to the last point about adaptable through deep game understanding. As Keith mentioned before, we've been lucky to sit in many webinars with Ferdinand and Jamie Carragher, and we were speaking about how do you become adaptable? Well, the best players and the best defenders study the game. They know if they play in a back five or a back four or different formations, it doesn't really change their understanding, but they're adaptable to playing different formations and different systems because they've got that position, and they've got that smell of danger and that anticipation when things might go.
I think as well, Jamie, just the adaptability thing as well. It's about taking mental notes against their opponents.
Yeah.
So it's literally, if you've got a quick player against you, how do you deal with the quick player? How do you deal with the Drogbas of this world, the physical attributes that they possess and who try and beat you up? How do you deal with that? How do you deal with the clever player that moves in between the lines and gives you a problem that way? Do you go and engage? Do you get someone to help? Or there's the skillful one that faces you up and has got trickery. There's a variety there, but having the flexibility and being able to adapt to deal with all those sort of threats through the game.
I think on that, Keith, as well, I think it's about giving the players opportunity to experience that as well. Sometimes they'll get it wrong, won't they? And I think sometimes we'll go, oh, well, we've not got the quickest centre half, so we might put them at full back in this game because they might get done by this player, or, they're not great at being faced up, or whatever the situation is. But ultimately, they've got to build a catalogue of experiences in order to solve those problems and find their own way of dealing with it. I think that's really important.
Yeah, I think in today's world, we can obviously pre-arm them with sort of clips and videos, can't we? At least they get a chance to look at the opponent and maybe sense some of the things that they're good at. So I think that years gone by, you turned up and you just played against who you played against. You didn't really know them. So I think, and especially at international level, you've got loads of material to go at, haven't you? So that helps, I think.
I also think, so to back that up, Chris, is you can definitely develop that in training by being skillful with your sessions in terms of who you're coming up against in training. So is it coming up against a sort of Didier Drogba type, or you might be coming up against one that drops in the hole and gets turned and runs at you? So putting the centre backs in different situations and getting them out the comfort zone really, and getting that experience of defending against different types of players within training.
Yeah, I like the expression sparring partners, trying to put people up against others to give them that experience before they go into the actual fight. I think that's really important.
Yeah, I think the competitive elements of what you're describing there and some of the real detail, isn't it, is about coaching, and it's about player development, and I'm just interested in Rich, and a few of you might have said it, this kind of smell the danger kind of phrase, It seems to me a bit romantic that it's smelling the danger, when I'm sure there's some key cues that sort of happen, for defenders to see that, and I want to also try and unpick some of the situations that you'll find yourself in the final third as a centre back, whether you're being broken on a quick break, whether there's someone tries to play a quick sort of 1-2 around you, or someone makes a blindside run, or it's going to be the balls in wide areas. So Richie, do you want to just give us a bit more about smelling the danger? Because you said a bit more than that about setting up the cues or getting the centre backs to recognise the cues of the practice design. Go on, what would it mean to an actual coach smelling the danger?
Yeah, I think you can talk about many different scenarios in the game. There's so many different aspects where this example could come into. I'm just thinking out loud now in terms of, if you're in the sort of finish the attack and you're in the final third and you're looking to score a goal, it's, is your centre half, has he got that mindset of what if? So what if the ball breaks now and there's a left winger hanging out? Am I in a position, or have I got my teammates to help me if it breaks? So I think it's always been the what if man. If instead of seeing what's going on at the top end of the pitch, if it's in a transition, what might you do to get help around you, or will you put yourself in a better position if you think you might put that ball down that channel there? Have I got it covered? Am I going to win that race before he gets there? Mm-hmm. And I think that's just one example, really, from the transitional point of view.
Yeah, we spoke about this the other day, didn't we? That perhaps those defenders that lack a yard of pace tend to be more looking at the what ifs and organising in front of them and around them, and are much more sort of conscientious and more leadership types, because they don't want to get exposed, and maybe sometimes the athletic lads switch off a little bit at times, and maybe are not quite as anticipating what's going to happen next.
Yeah, I think that's pretty appropriate for both the male and female game, isn't it, Chris? About how individuals adapt to their circumstances and their individual attributes. Someone's asked a really good question, and it's happened in recent years, and obviously we'll know some sort of high profile, smaller in terms of height centre halves that have gone back there. Mascherano being the obvious kind of one that jumps out. Yeah. I also think of Cannavaro going back, whatever, 10 years ago was 5'10", 5'11", but had incredible athleticism and, could leap onto your garden shed probably with how he could adapt. Emma, do you want to unpick anything from with your experiences, that situations that cause female centre backs real issues? Do you want to go through anything? Maybe is it defending from crosses possibly, or is it the 1v1 quick play? What jumps out at you at some of the real nuances that you want to help them with?
I think from sort of looking at, and we did a whole project on the last World Cup and looking at other nations, best in the world, best centre halves, and ourselves. I think there's a real big indicator on centre halves' ability to defend in wide areas, and are they comfortable to step out and cover fullbacks if they're broken, or actually do we want them to stay central and defend the cross? And there seems to be a little bit of a reluctantness, I can't say that, to step out into those wide areas in case they're exposed. And I think that's an area where if we can get braver centre halves that can prioritise danger, as well as obviously the place around them understanding a little bit of cover, balance and recovery shape, then actually might give us that confidence to start excelling in that area. But I think that's a real major one. Our centre halves comfortable stepping out into those wider areas.
Yeah, good points. Expanding.
Sorry?
Yeah, okay. Thanks, Em. Good points.
Yeah.
Ed, do you want to just talk to us about defending crosses?
Yeah, certainly. Just linking on to that point Emma made, about centre backs getting drawn into wide areas. That's where I link it back to training. That your training is realistic in terms of, for me, centre backs develop on big spaces, big areas. I think you can have a really small-sided game, or you can have 11-11. I've seen it on a 30 by 30 pitch. Great tempo, some really good technical ability. It challenges you in possession. But how do you really challenge your centre backs? Because their biggest fear, whether they're quick or slow, like I said before, is the spacing behind, or is that centre forward dropping into the space between the lines. So I think how you design your session to develop centre backs is a really important part of that. The decision making, those little bits of ring craft, all of those things come into that on a bigger area, I believe. What was your question again?
defending crosses, Ed, what is some of the nuances you think that you've obviously studied it in great depth and detail? What are some of the things that come to the fore out defending crosses from your perspective?
Well, I think that, in terms of looking at structure in a back four, most teams will generally look the same. Whether it's the fullback going out to stop the cross, your first centre half always talk about getting your line in that near post, second centre half, middle of the goal, fullback covering inside that far post. So looking at teams structurally, that's most teams' setups. The best teams do it consistently well. The best fullbacks obviously stop crosses. But we've just seen myself and Richie been looking at quite a bit over the last few weeks, and it's just that tendency for the centre halves at times to get drawn out of position, to get drawn out of their near post space. But the best ones, we'll look at it in terms of their recovery, their speed of recovery, the body shape to recover, the anticipation. But that first centre half is often really recovering to a zone and getting ready to adjust, and that second centre half again is recovering, it's probably engaging to mark a little bit earlier. They're the key things. But then also that technique, and when the ball's coming in the air, have you got your footwork right to apply the header on the ball? Have you got your footwork right to make good contacts on the clearance?
I think just to back up Andy's point on that, as I say, we've done a lot of work on the defending crossing aspects, and we always get asked the question on is it man marking in the box or is it zonal? And we've studied the best teams in the world at defending crosses, and it might look slightly different. So your European teams might say it's man for man in the box and you mark, and what we're finding is that the best centre halves are just getting themselves in a position in the zone, like Eagles mentioned, and getting in that position to affect the flight of the ball, but being in contact to win the header or win the clearance. So getting that sort of line of recovery, but knowing that you're in a position to affect it and making sure that your attacker can't win that head and you're close enough to go and to make that contact on the cross.
Mm-hmm. I think, Jamie, it depends on the situation. When you're marking zone or you're marking man for man, I think it depends if it's a quick attack, and there's no time to think. I think it's then you're looking after your player, and I think. But when you've got structure and you've got able to sort of get into that sort of zonal position, I think what I've seen in certainly the younger element is they get into the zones, but they don't necessarily engage with the players.
Yeah.
So they're in between, and people can get in between them. So it's a case of having a good body position. A lot of centre backs tend to be close to the ball, have lack of awareness around on their outside shoulder. So it is literally body position and decision when to engage the player when you're in that zonal position. The best ones make that that timing of getting it and engaging the opponents.
Yeah, I think also making contact. Don Howe used to talk about the still arm. So when you're making contact with your opponent, that they can't get across the front of you because you've got your arm out, and you're kind of disrupting their movement without fouling, of course, but being just subtle enough to make it awkward for the striker to make clean runs. You're right. Sorry, Chris.
That's a really interesting point. We're just picking up a project at the minute, and we've started looking at sort of like 1v1 duels and the ability of, to ride interference and have contact. And from an out of possession perspective, some of the ones we've looked at, I think it's something like you're 60% more likely to win possession if you've made physical contact with the player as opposed to when you just trying to get to them. I think that's a part of the game that I don't think, we called it an art, or you mentioned it, the ugly side of the game earlier. We're almost turning to a little bit non-contact at times, and I actually don't should fear encouraging players to make contact with players as long as it's obviously safe and appropriate, and obviously within the rules of the game.
Yeah. And I think with younger
nudging people, Emma, isn't it? Just before they receiving the ball, it's that little nudge that maybe just disrupts them, knocks them off balance, that kind of thing.
Yeah. And I think it's even worse with younger players. They tend to be very shy about the physical contact.
Yeah. And just on that, Chris, I think the younger players have a tendency to ball watch, and they're not necessarily getting exposed enough to actually marking in the box and what that looks like, and what is key information and detail you're giving to them players about not letting them run across the front here. If he does a double movement and tries to run around the back of you, what you how do you defend it?
Yeah. Yes.
So a little bit around the conversation around late developers, really.
Yes.
You know, are centre backs developing late? Are we just missing them early on? And why that might be? Why are centre backs developing later?
Yeah, I've been doing some research into this, and it is obvious that the people are coming from other positions on the pitch, either wingers, centre midfield players, even strikers. If we go back to Mika Richards, he started as a striker. Jamie Carragher started as a striker. Colin Hendry started as a striker. So, and even Trent, you know, the modern day fullbacks have played in other positions. And I think the big take home message for me is that with players in the academies, they need to be aware that they give these kids another chance in another position. And if they show an attitude to want to defend, then you might find a gem. And it seems as though it's a necessary part of the journey to learn the game. And maybe this is part of the journey, reading the game. So we talk about an essential part of being a centre-back is to read the game, get into positions early, and maybe playing elsewhere up the pitch to start with. That gives you that library of information that you can draw on when the game's all in front of you, because obviously further up the pitch, it's all around you. It's a completely different game. But when it's all in front of you, it all makes sense. Certainly that was my journey. I started as a left winger and ended up as a left back, and it all seemed so much easier when the game was all in front of me.
I think another point on this was, especially the England journey, was a lot of these players were coming from not necessarily Premier League clubs and then become England players. So, you know, there have many conversations and debates around why are they coming into the England system a little bit later? Why does centre half develop later? Is there a trend around centre halves from lower league clubs being the ones that eventually come through, and why is that? And I think a lot of the points we made was around some of these lads who are, you know, like your John Stones being at Barnsley, your Phil Jones being at Blackburn, and you know, these type of players were getting opportunities in lower leagues to defend more often, defend earlier. So I think Phil Jones was 18. So I had a good conversation with Gary Bowyer around when he come to Blackburn at 12. I think he made his debut at 18. You know, playing football, not necessarily in the Premier League, in different levels. And then you've got John Stones being at Barnsley, to learn how to defend in the lower leagues, getting turned, doing the sort of ugly side of the game, having to defend direct balls, diagonal balls, and you know, maybe these players are getting exposed to not real defending, but defending earlier than other players, maybe at the top level.
And I think we also spoke about the fact that most of them get their debuts in fullback areas, and that there seems to be a reluctance from managers to play them in their central defender role to begin with. It's almost like they've got to win the trust before they can then go back to a position that they're most comfortable with.
Yeah,
I think that's the key to it, Chris, isn't it? Like you say, is that trust. If you're positioned as a goalkeeper or centre back, you run the risk of one mistake and lose you the game. You know, and that's why managers are loath to put a young centre half in, whereas a wide player or centre forward, you can bring them off the bench. You know, if it doesn't work, it's not the end of the world. But it's that fear of obviously losing the game that's the biggest consideration. But the point we make with those is really interesting on the positions they play in, and also where they're starting their careers. You know, the list could go on in terms of England players in recent years. You know, Tarkowski, Dunk, Joe Gomez started at Charlton. You know, it's the real common trend that they have from clubs outside the Premiership. Like Gary Cahill started at Aston Villa, but didn't got his breakthrough. Where was it, Keith? You remind me. Was it Burnley?
Gary Cahill went on loan to Burnley, and then Sheffield United, and then moved permanently to Bolton. Yeah. But again, you know, the emphasis is obviously having the opportunity at a younger age, probably lower down the scale, But as we've all touched on, it's very much an important position, like a goalkeeper. It is that trust element, and the younger you are, it's more difficult, obviously, to play in those positions. But I think it's evident there, if you're looking across the pathways, 16s, 17s, 18s, and 19s. You know, there's only Phil Jones and John Stones have sort of appeared in an England shirt. So it just goes to show, you know, the opportunity for the guys that don't get the shirts early on. It's just those experiences at club level that gives them the chance later on.
Yeah, because Harry, obviously, he got in the first team at Sheffield United at 17, didn't he? So he sort of bucked that trend a bit.
Yeah.
Sorry, Rambo. Go on, mate.
What about the women's side, Emma? What does that look like, the women's side of the game?
Yeah, I mean, the trend's really similar. So I've just sort of like had a little look at, you know, the full centre half that went to the World Cup last summer. So just to sort of like describe some of the numbers on the screen, that the numbers in red on the left-hand side, 168 caps is how many caps the four players had between them going into that World Cup. That's an average of 42, albeit Steph's was up at like 80 something, and I think Millie's was around 20. So there's some real differences. Numbers in blue is that compared to the US women's national team. So you can see there's some significant differences there. And when we start looking back into the youth career, we've had, you know, two players that, albeit, you know, the 2019 World Cup wasn't their first major tournament, but they hadn't had a youth major tournament. And similar to the men's, you know, there was two late entries into the system. So that, you know, the question we've got to ask ourselves is, are we looking at positional conversions later because of the players that we've got? Are we not developing our current centre halves well enough in terms of exposing them to that chaos and embracing, you know, I think Richie spoke around that real defending, that, you know, being in awkward situations, that 360, being able to turn and get pulled around, and sometimes it's a relatively safe position at times, centre half. You can see sort of within the four players here, you know, Steph and Millie, I think both started their career as a centre forward and sort of worked their way back through the years. So what is it that they're getting from those positions that have made them into the centre half that they are now? And, you know, same with Leah, you know, she started in midfield areas, played right across the back four. And I think the four things that these players have in common is they were all playing senior football at a young age. I think, you know, Steph was really young. I think she was like 14, 15, I think. And, you know, she come through at Sunderland and, you know, had a real good career from a club perspective, exposed to tier one football early. I think the trend we're starting to see in the women's game as the WSL one's getting stronger is our younger centre halves and our younger players aren't getting those experiences as early. So that's again going to impact on the cap accumulation and the experiences that, you know, the players are developing. And I can see us sort of starting to follow the trend of the men's game unless, you know, these players start getting those experiences from a younger age.
I think we've lost Chris now.
I was just going to ask, you spoke about selecting your best players and that conversion taking place. Is that something you started to see more in the women's game in terms of just selecting your best players and then moulding positions around them?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting debate in terms of, you know, do we profile a position and start developing players around that, or do we look at and almost specialise younger and start thinking around, okay, we've got a centre half, they maybe struggle with, you know, defending on turn and recovery runs, so we might start exposing them higher up the pitch consciously in order for them to develop that, or do we go multiple positions? There seems to be, you know, a real benefit of that and a later specialisation. You know, you look at some nations, you know, that we're looking into at the minute, their philosophy is the best players on the pitch all the time, from under 15s right through to seniors, you know, whereas you look at our, you know, the way that we're going and the pool of players that we've got is, are we better going a wider pool of players because we don't know who those late developers are going to be? I think it's quite dangerous putting all your eggs in one basket, you know, with the younger players and sticking all your best or your early developers on the pitch at the same time, all the time.
I was just going to throw it over to Richie, Keith and Andy in terms of the men's pathway. Is that something you've seen more evident in terms of players playing across positions as they move through their academy pathway and international career?
Yeah, I mean, I think especially, you know, you're speaking to top level defenders who are playing at the elite end of the game, and I think they've all had a lot of them have had a pathway of playing different positions, and you know, sometimes especially centre halves develop later, so physically they develop later. So, you know, sometimes you might get a player who does play in lots of different positions, but people might catch up by the time to get to 15, 16. They might find themselves that they've developed bigger physically, so they end up moving further back. So I think there's a lot of factors, especially physically and maturation, in terms of when defenders actually develop. And as I say, we see a trend where it does become later, but I think at some stage you have to find what position that you think they're going to be, whether that's, I'm not putting a number on it, whether it's 15, 16, 17, whatever it may be, at an age where they now need to start learning the game and start learning the position that they're going to be in. But for sure, there's no harm in playing different positions in the younger end, because you get to learn the game in a different light. You get to see you get a different lens in different positions.
And I was just going to take the conversation on into sort of the implications for coaching. So there's a question come in just on the back of what you spoke about earlier in terms of how do you coach the what ifs, and what sort of information do you feed into your players about when that may happen, and how do you go about manipulating your sessions to bring in them different scenarios?
Well, again, it's practice design, isn't it? And you can manipulate the sessions in little counter-attack type sessions that then get the players thinking about what happens if it breaks down, what happens if it goes into that area, and players are getting switched on immediately. So you're defending whilst you're attacking, as it were. You're still thinking about the what ifs, and little counter-attack games can help you do that.
But also, Chris, to back that up, I think your training has to look like the game, and I think you will get your scenarios if your sessions and your practices are looking like the game, and you'll get your what ifs, and then maybe specific what ifs you're looking for, which you can manipulate within your sessions. But for me, and I know Keith and Eagle have both alluded to it, that I think sessions have to look like you would get in a game, otherwise you'll never get to practice them what if moments.
Yes.
I think those what if moments, I think, is important that we train at those worst case moments as well. So, you think about big moments in games, in tournaments, in, cup finals, whatever that might be. That one instance can be the difference between winning a major tournament and not winning a major tournament. So actually, how often have we exposed them to that worst case scenario? I see so many sessions where we always say, we can't put the forwards, overloaded, it'd be too easy for them. Actually, in turn, we make it too easy for the centre halves and the defenders. When do we expose them, and when do we almost expose them to that worst case situation and go, this is going to be tough. It's going to be tough physically. It's going to be tough mentally. But actually, if we expose you to that in training, then hopefully it becomes that little bit easier on a match day. Yeah,
train hard, fight easy. Yeah.
I think there's a lot to be said about outnumbering exercises. So, putting defenders under increased pressure, whether it's sort of 2v1s, 3v2s, 4v3s, and even your back four in against six attackers. It's making these critical decisions under stress. You then, obviously, the guys have mentioned it's very much game specific, I think, and don't forget the areas as well. Defending is in big areas. Don't just make them in terms of small-sided games, because it's easy to recover or easy to get there. They have to make judgments in terms of the full pitch, exposed 2v1 on bigger areas, and use that decision to make it predictable, to send it wide, to delay the attacks, those kind of things. To mention Chris's as well, the what-if situation is definitely transition games that the turnover. So, we always call it balance behind the attack. So making sure that you've got structure while you're attacking, so don't get caught out too much. Particularly in international football, we find that it's a killer if you're caught out and you're not in the right shape, because top players will hurt you.
Yeah,
we've got the El Capitan back, so
yeah, good.
I think it's a little bit of an on there. I need to be pedaling a bit faster on my bike. I think
another point. Oh, sorry, I was just going to make another point on that. Listening to Ian Evett on a podcast, he's done great things with Barrow this year, and he deliberately got smaller centre backs and has taught them how to defend being a smaller centre back. But he picked them because he felt they were better footballers and he wanted to pass his way through the thirds. And so interesting going forward, what the ban on heading, or the staged ban on heading for our younger players, what impact will that have for the future? Will our defenders not be as good in the air, or will that be a disadvantage for us, or can we turn that into an advantage in some way? Things to think about.
Yeah, that's a good point, Chris. I think there's some other good points that are coming in the chat box that I've been reading as my internet's been playing up, about the difference in positions and how they link those, build their relationships, and how you expose them to different things as you're going through the formats. A bit about small-sided games, and like Keith said, about transitional practices. And then I suppose the other bit that we just need to link into this is some of the work we've done with obviously picking Gareth's brains on a daily basis, around his experiences as an England international. This quote here about assuming the players don't know. That's not to say they can't do things, which says they've got in-depth detail about what to do, but it's sort of like the challenge, I suppose, for all of us on the call, isn't it? It's like, how do you talk to the players about the detail that's required? And also, as he alludes to here, he's doing a brilliant job, as Phil did in the Women's World Cup, but trying to speak to top players about what's required to be a top centre-back who are at the top of their game. Players can always get better with certain things. In terms of the coaching implications, what else jumps out at us in terms of? So we've talked about practice design, we've talked about numbers, we've talked about matchups, so it's really competitive. What else jumps out as sort of implications for coaches that hits us at this time when we've got sort of 10 minutes to go in our session? Who wants to kick us off?
Yeah, I've got one. I think making the environment's really important. I think there's nothing glamorous about defending. You say to your players, we're going to do a defending session, and sometimes they're not as enthused by that, or people will flip it and use language like, well, we'll get to work on attacking at the same time, or what's the reward for the defenders? And I'm thinking, how can we make those defending sessions fun and competitive to almost get out some of those psych returns? So the mentality of defending that we mentioned earlier in the call. And I think that ability of your coach how do we dial up our own behaviours so that actually that transpires for the players so they enjoy defending? I don't see a thirst for defending anymore. Defenders want to work on playing out from the back and their passing technique, and I look at IDPs and they're all, the players want to work on their in possession attributes. How do we make it more, I guess, attractive for players to want to develop their out of possession attributes?
I think that focus on individual development plans helps that. I think if you get them into small numbers initially and maybe give them some early success and then build on that, introducing stronger opposition. I know speaking to Steve Harrison, who's obviously had great experience as a coach and player, and he really focuses in on some sessions around in the afternoons that he gives the players early success, so that it keeps them interested and works only for small amounts of time, 20 minutes, half an hour. It isn't going 20,000 headers. It is going through some real specific stuff and really teaching them the craft of defending. And he says he gets great buy-in, and then introduce better and better opposition until you're up against the very best.
I think Emma makes a really good point about the sort of culture side of it, and you've got to create a culture to sort of celebrate defending, really, because I think it's a real important part that if you build a culture and reward defending within sessions, reward it however you see fit, but also value it. So it's easy to always give the well done to the centre forward who scores 6 in training, but are we giving the well done to the ones who do a great block or a good tackle or a good interception or a header? So I think the culture side is really important on that side. And to back Chris's point up around Steve Harrison stuff in the afternoon, it's about just grooving habits and just keep on building on habits that you're learning with the back four work that you do.
Yeah, I think it's interesting in the sorry, Keith. Interesting one of the points from Rhys Williams, which I think is a really good one, Rhys, about the games program. What is just thinking about what the games program provides, in terms of. So I think you've said attackers need easy games to get chances, and defenders need tough games to defend. Keith, do you want to expand on some of the considerations, implications for coaches?
Yeah, I was going to mention. Sorry, Jamie, you dropped out on the last question, but I was just going to back up really what Emma and Richie has mentioned, and Chris. I think for me, the key coaching, the fundamentals of being a good coach is to understand the strengths that the player already has. We all want to try and get the perfect defender, but obviously people have certain attributes, whether they're tall, whether they're small, whether they can compete, whether they haven't got a yard of pace. But to understand what they have in terms of their strengths and really give them that confidence to impose those strengths in the game and play with some personality. The other thing is that players will adapt. So if they do have a deficiency, they'll find a way how to deal with that deficiency. If they can't run, they'll be able to read the game better. If they are, if they can't physically compete, they'll have to work around by boxing around the defender and waiting for that first touch, etc. So I've dealt with a few players, and I'm going to tell you about Alan Wright, who was 5'6" left back. And Alan Wright, wouldn't have made a career on the far post with balls coming in. But Alan Wright found a way how to use his body for attackers and wingers not to get free headers. So what I'm trying to say is that we all want to change people and to be the perfect role model of a defender, but to understand first and foremost what can he do, and then use those strengths to introduce to your sessions and things, and try and work on him, and they adapt. Players will adapt, and they'll find out sometimes for themselves. It doesn't always have to be you telling them everything.
I think this is right in the chat box about people's reinforcing points that people have made, and also some elements around, again, the kind of step principle about, the space, the task, the equipment, and the players, in terms of like it's working on the brilliant basics, isn't it? Like you've chatted about the culture of defending, rewarding it. John talks about in the chat about rewarding a goal line clearance as much as rewarding someone who scores a hat trick. It's still our ability and our kind of like attitude to coaching, isn't it? And rewarding the players on several different things. But yeah, I think defending's definitely. Sorry, the other point I was going to make is defending's becoming more technical, isn't it? At the top end of the game with the introduction of VAR. What do people think about sort of marking skills and attributes? How that's going to develop.
Well, I think we could learn a bit from basketball, that's for sure. Being aware of how to use your body, and so martial arts and those sort of complementary things that I think some clubs use. But I was also going to talk about the games program in terms of going and playing against teams that play maybe direct, and you've got to deal with a lot of aerial stuff, or players that are big and strong, and you've got to be able to box around them and use your brains more and be a bit more subtle about how you intercept and play against them. If someone's stronger than you, you're never going to win that fight, so you've got to find a way. I think there's the alternative sports, I think, can offer a lot in those situations.
Yeah, great. If we just want to finish off with I think the points we made on this last slide about understanding our players' strengths and weaknesses, learning to outplay our direct opponent, we chatted about a little bit today. And obviously we've just had a whistle-stop tour about defending and centre-half play. We talked about rewarding good defending, principles and blocking and et cetera in 1v1. What about the last point about the sort of psychological elements? And it all comes into it. I know we talked about it, in the round, but mentality, concentration, how would we really develop those things in our practices and in our games program and really focus on those elements?
Yeah, a good point a coach made to me recently was that by introducing the competition in the games all the time, so I don't know if people have heard of the competitive cauldron idea, where there's points to everything that you're doing, that it kind of builds that mentality to want to compete and to win. And that there's like a leaderboard going on all the time, so that there's kind of It's almost like tapping into the games, the video games ideas around you're on a leaderboard and you're going up and down depending on how you do. And that can create a real good atmosphere amongst the players and competitive nature.
Emma, do you want to talk to us about some of the work you've done with the women's national teams around mentality, concentration?
Yeah, it's a great point. I think for me, I mentioned it earlier around making defending more glamorous, if you like, for lack of a better word. And, I think Richie used a better word in terms of the culture around our sessions. And I think, when we're putting together practices, are we rewarding clean sheets as much as scoring a goal? So we always go, how long can we go without conceding? It might be that the other team doesn't, you're defending the goal, you don't have an attacking outcome. It is literally how long can you not concede for, but then rotate the teams around and see who's winning and still make it that winnable and competitive environment without always having the carrot being the attacking. I think sometimes that's where we sort of maybe put ourselves as a disadvantage in terms of developing some of those out of possession characteristics. And, it's just recognising when do we dial up the challenge and the chaos in terms of concentration, and when actually do we strip it right back and we're going for absolute clarity within our session and information, and we might have to strip back some of the physical returns and, understanding what we're doing and why we're doing it and when we're doing it, I think is the most important thing.
Yeah, thanks, Sam.
The other point, Robert, the other point.
Final points then, guys. Let's just be the final points from you then, Ed. We come to you first, Ed, then Rich, and then Keith to finish off just the last 5 minutes.
Yeah, no, just can you hear me there, Robert?
Yeah.
Just that last point, really, in terms of rewarding, there is a really good argument to that, and that's important. But I think if you set the right culture and the right environment, and your sessions are designed properly, I think just by the nature of it, the competitiveness, the players demand it of each other. If someone doesn't go with a run, if someone doesn't challenge for a header, if someone doesn't make a recovery run, I think they demand of each other. I think that's where you need to get to, if you can, because then it's driven from within, it's driven from the players rather than the coach having to shout well done or I'm going to stick you 2 points on a leaderboard. I think you can really help with things like that. I think that's a really clever, good way of doing things. If you get everything right, the players will demand of each other, and that's when you get your best returns. So for me, that's a massive part of it.
Yeah, thanks, Ed. Richie?
Yeah, just to back up Eagle's point, really, in terms of the defending is in every practice that you do, or it should be in every practice that you do for me, in terms of if you're building that culture. It's such an important aspect of the game, and I think you can never neglect it. So, as the Eagle said, I think if you get that culture and you build it from your sessions and you value defending in everything you do, I think you will get that demands from the players and demands from each other. And then putting them in situations where, back to your final point on the slide about putting them in stressful situations would help that sort of mentality and concentration. And then, the last bit that I wanted to add would be when you're talking about the value of defending and the practices in your defending is actually looking back with the individual players and showing them training footage if you've got access to it, and showing individuals, showing groups, showing units. That can also build that culture with the video analysis and the unbelievable technology we've got these days.
Yeah, good points, Rich.
Yeah.
Keith, to you for our final point, and I'll try and summarise where we've got to.
I'm at the risk of repeating myself with all my colleagues here. I've just put down what a best defender looks like, and for me, it's the best defenders are fiercely competitive. They study the game. They're forever trying to better themselves. They're dealing with new experiences, and they're taking mental notes on how to deal with different situations. I've just wrote it down, and I think that summarises what a top defender is: listening to the tops, the greats, listen to the grassroots sort of stuff. First and foremost, they have to be competitive and have a passion for defending that they're really good at. Then we've got to back it up with the environment and the culture to back that. It's an art, and don't forget that defending is an art. And I just obviously make it competitive, make it enjoyable, let them want to come back for the next session. And equally as well, when you're working on defending, you're actually improving attackers as well. So if you're making the defenders, making it really difficult for the attackers, it's improving them as well. So vice versa, if the attackers are really on it and really want to give the defenders a tough time, it makes them better as well. So make it competitive, enjoyable, and just remember they are fiercely competitive defenders. They want to win.
Yeah, terrific points and good summary to finish, I think, this afternoon. Thanks for all your Rich, Souls, Keith, and thanks, Matt, for stepping in, Ramsbottom, with keeping all this sort of getting pieced together.
Yeah.
I just want to, I suppose, also thank you for all your, I suppose, enthusiasm to want to get football back up and running. When it does get up and running, please stay safe, look after yourselves and your families. You can, if you haven't already, subscribe to the FA's new YouTube channel for lots of really interesting footage, and a lot of the webinars that I think I know went in the chat box about the recording of this will be on there shortly.
Yeah, just to re-emphasise, this will go on the FA Learning YouTube page at the start of next week. Check out there for all of resources and webinars.